Searchers after horror haunt strange far places. For them are the catacombs of Ptolemy and the carven mausolea of the nightmare countries. They climb the moonlit towers of ruined Rhine castles, and they falter down black cobweb steps beneath the scattered stones of forgotten cities in Asia. The haunted wood and the desolate mountain are their shrines, and they linger by sinister monoliths on uninhabited islands. But the true epicure in the terrible, for whom a new thrill of unutterable ghastliness is the chief end and justification of existence, esteems most highly the ancient, lonely farmhouses of backwoods New England. For it is here that the dark elements of strength, solitude, grotesqueness, and ignorance combine to form the perfection of the hideous. Oh yeah. Most horrible of all are those little unpainted wooden houses, remote from traveled ways, usually found squatting on some damp grassy slope or leaning against some gigantic outcropping of rock. For 200 years and more, they have leaned or squatted there while the vines have crawled and the trees have grown and spread. And they are almost hidden now behind lawless luxuriances of green and guardian shrouds of shadow. But the small, paned windows still stare shockingly, as if blinking through some lethal stupor which wards off madness by dulling the memory of unspeakable things. Only these small, silent, staring houses can tell all of the secrets that lay hidden there, but they are not communicative, being loath to shake off the drowsiness that helps them forget. Sometimes one feels it would be a mercy to tear down these houses, for they must often dream. It was to just such a time-battered edifice of this description that I found myself driven one evening in November 1896 by a rainfall of such chilling copiousness that any shelter would have been preferable to exposure. I had been traveling among the people of the Miskatonic Valley, questing after certain genealogical data, and I found myself upon an abandoned road on a bicycle, overtaken by the storm, at a point far from any town and confronted with no possibility of refuge save an antique and repellent wooden farmhouse nestled between two trees at the base of a rocky hill. This house impressed me unfavorably the very moment I espied it. Honest, wholesome structures do not stare at travelers so slyly and so hauntingly, and I had encountered legends in my genealogical researches which biased me against places of this kind. But such was the fury of the elements as to overcome my scruples, and I did not hesitate to wheel my machine up the weedy rise leading to the closed door, which seemed at once so secretive and so suggestive. I had, for some reason, taken it for granted that the place was abandoned. Yet, as I drew closer, I was not so sure. And so, rather than trying the door, I knocked, feeling as I did so a trepidation I could scarcely explain. My rapping evoked no response, and so, after once again trying the summons, I tried the rusty latch and found the door unfastened. There was a small vestibule with plaster crumbling from the walls, and through the door there came a faint but hateful odor. I carried my bicycle inside and closed the door behind me. Ahead, there was a narrow staircase, flanked by a small door which presumably led to a cellar. There were doors on the left and right, which I assumed led to rooms on the ground floor. Leaning my bicycle against the wall, I crossed to the door on the left and entered a small chamber dimly lighted by dusty windows and furnished in the most bare and primitive manner. It was a sitting room, for there were chairs and a table and a fireplace over which an antique clock ticked on the mantel. Books and papers there were few, and in the prevailing gloom I could not readily discern their titles. What impressed me was the uniform air of archaism that was evident in every visible detail. Houses in this region were all rich in relics of the past, but here the antiquity was curiously complete. I could not identify a single article of post-revolutionary date. If the place had not been so humble, it would have been a collector's paradise. As I surveyed this quaint apartment, I felt an increase in that aversion that I felt upon first seeing the exterior of the house. Now, what inspired this fear or loathing, I can by no means describe, except to say that there was something in the whole atmosphere which was redolent of unhallowed age and unpleasant crudeness and of secrets best left forgotten. I felt disinclined to sit down, so I merely wandered about examining various articles which caught my attention. My curiosity was piqued by a book of about medium size lying open upon the table and presenting so antediluvian an aspect that I marveled at beholding it outside of a museum. It was bound in leather with metal fittings and was in an excellent state of preservation. I turned to the title page, and my wonder grew greater when it proved to be no less than Pigafetta's account of the Congo region, written in Latin from the notes of the sailor Lopez and published in Frankfurt in the year 1598. I had often heard of this book with its curious illustrations by the brothers de Bry, and I momentarily forgot my unease in my desire to turn the pages before me. And then, after a moment or two, something occurred which upset my nerves and revived my sensation of disquiet. What bothered me was the way the book kept falling open at plate 12, an illustration depicting a butcher's shop of the Anzique cannibals. I felt some shame at being susceptible to so small a thing, but the picture nonetheless bothered me, especially in connection with some adjacent passages which detailed Anzique recipes. And then I heard someone walking overhead. I listened as the heavy footsteps slowly descended the creaking staircase. There was a silence, during which, presumably, the walker was examining my bicycle in the hall. And then the steps drew near, and then he entered the room. He was a person of such singular aspect that I should have exclaimed aloud, were it not for the restraints of good breeding. His height could not have been less than 6 feet, and despite an overall air of age and poverty, he was stout and powerfully built. He was old and gray-bearded and ragged, but his blue eyes were clear and keen and burning. Were it not for his horrible unkemptness, he would have been as distinguished-looking as he was impressive. But he was horribly unkempt. His clothes were little more than a mass of tatters, and his state of uncleanliness surpassed all description. The appearance of this man and the fear which he inspired prepared me for something like enmity, and so I was surprised when he addressed me in a voice full of respect and ingratiating hospitality. "Catch the rain, be ye? Ah, I'm glad you was nigh the house and had the good sense to come on in. I reckon I was asleep, else I'd have heard you. I ain't as young as I used to be, and I need a powerful sight of naps these days. So, you traveling far? Don't see too many folks on this road since they took down the old Arkham stage." I told him I was going to Arkham, and I apologized profusely for my inexcusable rudeness in barging into his home. "Ah, think nothing of it, young sir. New faces is scarce around here, and I ain't had too many visitors to cheer me up. So, I reckon you be hailing from Boston, don't you? Yeah, I always know a town man when I see one. Had one down here for district schoolmaster back in '84, but he vanished all of a sudden. Ain't nobody ever heard of him since." Well, the old man seemed to be in a marvelous good humor. And he rambled on in an almost feverish geniality until it occurred to me to ask him how on earth he came to possess so rare a volume as Pigafetta's Regnum Congo. "Oh, you mean that African book? Yeah, I got that off Captain Ebenezer Holt. Him, as they say, was killed in the war. I was up to his house once trading horses, and I seen it, and I sure relished the pictures. So Eb gave it me on a trade. 'Tis a strange book. It's written in Latin, which I can't make heads or tails of. Did have a couple of schoolmasters read some of it to me, and old Parson Clark. Him, as they say, was drowned in the pond. Say, can you make anything out of it?" I told him that I could, and for his benefit, I read a few passages near the beginning. If I erred in my translation, he was not scholar enough to correct me, and he seemed quite pleased at my English versions. His proximity was becoming rather obnoxious, but I did not see any way to extricate myself without causing offense. And besides, I was amused by this ignorant old man and his childish fondness for the pictures in a book which he could not read, and I smiled as he talked on and on. "Yes, sir, sure 'tis funny how pictures can set a body thinking. Here, why don't you let me show you the best one?" He touched the book, and it fell open almost of its own accord, and as if from frequent consultation, to plate 12, the butcher's shop of the Annecy Cannons. The limbs and quarters hanging about the walls were ghastly, and the butcher with his axe was hideous. But the old man seemed to relish the view as much as I disliked it. What do you think of that? You ain't never seen the likes of that hereabouts, now have you? First time I seen that picture, I says to Ebenezer Holt, "Eb," says I, "there's a sight to stir you up and tickle your blood." Now, young sir, when I read in Scripture about slaying, like the way them Midianites was slew, I kinder think things, but I ain't got no picture. Now here, a body can see all there is to it. I swear, that feller getting chopped up gives me a tickle every time I look at him. I just have to keep looking at him. Look, you see where the butcher chopped off his feet? There's his head on the bench. There's his arm aside him. There's t'other arm on the ground beside the meat block. Well, as he went on in this shocking ecstasy, all of the fear I had felt before came back to me actively and vividly, and I trembled as I heard him speak. Yes, sir. Sure 'tis queer how a picture sets you thinking. You know, I gotta tell you, young sir, I'm right sot on this in here. After I got it off Ed, I used to look at it a lot. Especially after listening to old Parson Clark rant to Sundays in his big wig. And once, I tried something funny. Now, young sir, no need to start looking all scared. All I did is look at the picture afore killing the sheep for market. Somehow seemed like killing the sheep were more fun arter looking at. A rumble of thunder rattled the windows and shook the house down to its foundations, but the old man seemed not to notice. Yes, sir. It seemed like it were a lot more fun, but, well, 'tweren't quite satisfying. It's queer how a craving gets a hold of you. And I swear to God, sir, that thar picture gave me a hunger for victuals that I couldn't raise nor buy. There was a flash of lightning directly outside the window. I was temporarily blinded, and when my vision cleared, he was directly in front of me, his fetid breath hot on my face. Yeah. You know, they say that meat makes blood and flesh and gives you new life. So I got to thinking that maybe a feller could live longer and longer if the meat that he ate was more like his own. And then he stopped. Now, the interruption was not produced by my fright, which was considerable, or the fury of the storm. No, it was a small, though somewhat unusual occurrence. As the old man said those words, more like his own, there was a wet thump on the book that lay open between us. Now you will be thinking of rain and a leaky old roof. But rain is not red. And there, on the repulsively upturned page, was a red spatter, glistening bright. The old man saw it and glanced up in the room he had left about an hour before. I followed his gaze. And there, on the ceiling, was a large and irregular crimson stain that seemed to spread even as I viewed it. And then I looked at the man. And he looked at me. And at that moment came the titanic thunderbolt of thunderbolts, smashing into that house like the wrath of some cyclopean pagan god, blasting that house of unutterable secrets and bringing the oblivion which alone saved my life and my sanity. I awoke the next morning in a smoky solitude of blackened ruins. Of my host, there was no sign. Slowly, painfully, I made my way back to civilization. I have since tried to retrace my steps of that horrible night on many occasions, but I have never found a trace of those ruins, or that terrible old man, or that loathsome copy of Regnum Congo with its picture of the butcher's shop of the antique cannibals. small bit of trivia for you. Regnum Congo is a real book, and the picture described in this story is a real picture. I have seen it.
Linger a while for more refreshments and conversation among yourselves. Welcome, and we're glad you're here.